And so thank you to you all for serving on this panel. I definitely want to provide an opportunity for each of you to share more and brag about yourselves and the work that you're doing. And so I guess we'll walk through that. And so I'll start with Delegate Maldonado, if that's okay with you. No pressure. As a state delegate, you play arguably one of the most crucial roles in integrating AI into state operations and also possibly regulating the uses outside of the state as well and outside of just government use. And so I was hoping you can give us an overview of some of your work and your perspectives on the potential of AI. I know you gave a keynote earlier on the perspectives of the potential of AI, especially in the public sector, if that's okay.
Absolutely, thank you. And while we were all at the same conference this week, and I think most of us flew back in yesterday. And while I did not travel and do the karaoke circuit because I cannot sing, I still tried, and my voice also suffered a bit. But so what I would say is, this is such an incredibly exciting time to be in the tech space. And, AI is the shiny new thing that's really popular right now, but there's so much around it that, as the technology emerges, it's going to look differently. It's going to do things differently. So as a state legislator, I think I mentioned earlier today, we didn't go into my work here, but I'm a recovering tech lawyer, as you know, both as a tech lawyer and then as a business leader on the tech side. And what I will say is that, when I came into the General Assembly, it was clear to me that we didn't have enough legislators who understood technology. That worried me as a technologist because we are asked to carry all kinds of legislation. And when you don't understand the legislation, you are very vulnerable to just say yes or to say completely no. And either extreme, without curiosity, without reflection, without thoughtful conversation, doesn't leave us in a good place, doesn't progress us forward. So a couple of things that we did. We stood up a technology and innovation caucus to help educate legislators, and then really worked hard to be able to move some of the conversations into JCOTS, our Joint Commission on Technology and Science. I sit on their AI subcommittee. And this last session, we were able to pass Virginia's first online Child Data Privacy Protection Act. But it was one of a few bills that we brought forward. I also brought forward a bill on sort of algorithmic discrimination and looking at developer and deployers and what kinds of assessment impacts and the timeline of that and things that we need to do to make sure that we're making sure there's digital equity and that people are being able to use this technology in safe and trustworthy and transparent ways. And then, of course, our favorite topic of the day or the month or the year is deepfakes, and we brought some legislation forward. Both of those got carried over to 2025, so we will be bringing them back. And I think we have to continue to move the needle, but whatever we do, whether it's law, policy, or regulation, we have to make sure it's breathable and flexible, because this stuff is moving quickly and it's changing and evolving all the time. So strict regulation across the board is not going to allow us to stay competitive and innovative. So we've always got to balance that with protecting our people. So.
Thank you. Tracy, I'll pick on you next. OpenAI is at the forefront of generative AI technology. And from your vantage point, first, share with us some of the things that you're excited about, but also tell us more about yourself.
Sure. Testing. Is that working? Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tracy Lee, and I lead our state and local government affairs at OpenAI. I focus on most of our engagement with regard to state and local policymakers, our legislative and regulatory advocacy, and I manage those relationships across the 50 states while I'm based in California. I travel across the country, and I was with these fine folks at this conference. while I have my voice, because I did not go to karaoke, I flew in on a red eye last night back from California. So apologies if I'm a little bit slow this morning. Prior to joining OpenAI, I was previously at Okta, where I led our state and local government affairs as well. If you're not familiar with Okta, they are a digital identity and cybersecurity company. Prior to that, I served as on the public policy team at Lyft, doing very similar work, but for the West Coast, on the western part of Canada, so up in British Columbia. And prior to joining the tech sector, I myself was a public servant. I spent about 7 years as a local prosecutor, mostly in counties in California, but most recently, before joining the public sector, was an assistant DA in the city and county of San Francisco. So a lot of my perspective and my work is informed by being a public servant myself and understanding the trials and tribulations of the work that is government. So I appreciate everyone who is a public servant here. And I guess the question.
Yeah. Okay. So what are some of the more significant opportunities in the Gen AI space, and are there any policy considerations that are top of mind?
Yeah. So I think there are a variety of different benefits and considerations when you're thinking about implementing Gen AI. I think a lot of the other probably speakers earlier today had touched on them. One thing that especially resonates with me, and I have seen resonate with local government, is the potential of increasing language access. That is incredibly important because government can only serve constituents if it can communicate to them effectively. And you'll hear later from my colleague Felipe Mion, who's actually going to be doing, I think, the lunchtime keynote about one of our really key use cases that I'll touch on a little bit. But I would say increasing language access, increasing the accessibility of social services, improving constituent engagement with government and trusting government. I think all of us are probably very familiar with, when citizens get frustrated because they're not able to navigate through a local government website, if they go to the county clerk's office and they're not able to get an answer, if they're going to the building department to try to figure out the permitting process for an alternative dwelling unit they want to build in the back of their house. All of those things are extremely complicated to navigate, and I think the potential of Gen AI to help streamline that process, whether it's something as simple as a chatbot or government building on top of an API, for example, those are the potentials that we see, especially for state and local government. One thing that I want to touch on, sorry not to get too long-winded, is I myself was a local prosecutor for 7 years, and something that I experienced and that was a huge frustration for me working in the court system was not having enough interpreters. So going back to the translation piece. And oftentimes those interpreters, let's say there was one Arabic interpreter in the entire city of San Francisco bouncing around various different courthouses. And I, as a prosecutor, would get frustrated with that because that person is so over capacity, and then I have my victims and my witnesses and the judges and law enforcement officers waiting for this one interpreter to make their way to the courthouse and help translate a simple one-page document that otherwise would take, let's say through ChatGPT, a millisecond to translate into Arabic. And that type of inefficiency, I think, can really be cured if government can find a way to implement Gen AI in really productive ways. So that's just a very practical example that I like to share because it's something that especially resonates with me.
Yeah, and Tatiana Rice, my good friend, with your expertise in AI legislation, can you provide more information about yourself to the audience? And the question will be could you provide some insight into the current landscape and ethical challenges that lawmakers are focusing on?
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Caleb. I'll round out the conversation on karaoke and say I'm a perpetual people pleaser. So my song was Mr. Brightside, and I similarly am losing my voice a little bit. But I do want to take a pause and just acknowledge how incredible it is to be on a panel with all women of color and how that really reflects the conversation that we're having about the future of AI and the future of ethical AI and what that really means, how we're able to shape that conversation moving forward and what the future of our society really looks like as our society integrates technology more and more into our everyday lives. And so the Future Privacy Forum, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is a nonpartisan think tank based in DC. We really work at the intersection of a lot of different organizations from a lot of different member companies across all of the industries, from health to technology to social media companies to companies focused on kids, really across the spectrum, as well as civil society organizations, civil rights organizations, technologists, because our goal is trying to be able to bridge the gap between all of these different parties that oftentimes don't always talk to each other. So in my role, working with lawmakers, what we really try to do is focus on consensus views and best practices that are kind of agreed upon across all of the different actors and stakeholders in the process. And so when we have been looking at, as Caleb said, hundreds of bills this past legislative session, there have been a lot of different policy issues that have come up because, of course, AI spans across literally everything. There are dozens and dozens of different policy issues, but what we have kind of seen is it falling into kind of four main categories. One, we're the Future Privacy Forum, so of course we're looking at the privacy and data security policy implications associated with AI. Oftentimes that is focused on how these models are being created. Are they using personal information? Are they disclosing personal information? What are the data security risks? Second to that is, as Delegate Maldonado talked about, algorithmic bias and discrimination being a major focal point for a lot of policymakers because there are very significant consequences that can happen when you're using these kind of technologies in areas otherwise protected by civil rights laws, such as housing, employment, education, et cetera. Third is transparency. You'll see this a lot with generative AI. A lot of folks want to know, am I interacting with an AI system? How is the system being used? Is there any kind of recourse that I don't have to talk to a robot and can maybe talk to a human instead? And then lastly is just like, how do you incentivize ethical AI within your state, right? So a lot of policymakers do want to have AI investments in their state, but they want to be able to do it right because they know that the future is going to be headed in that way. So those are the kind of four main issues, and happy to talk more about, specific legislative trends that I've seen over time.
Thank you. Delegate Maldonado, one question I have for you is, one theme, I guess, is public-private partnerships. And what are some of your thoughts related to that? Public-private partnerships with government, working with private industry leaders in this space. And do you have any thoughts or responses?
I might have a few. I actually think it's imperative. I don't think that government is fully equipped or has the capacity to go at this alone. We don't attract talent into the government sector in the way that the private sector does. And that's for a number of reasons. So I think that when we look at this as a holistic sort of collaboration, we must be working with the private sector folks, from advocacy groups to technology companies to human rights and equal justice, all of those things, because this kind of technology impacts every piece, every component of our lives. And so there's a workforce development component, there's an education and academic component, there is a justice component, there is an equity component. And it is in bringing all that sort of diversity of thought together in those backgrounds that we start to tackle some really, really difficult issues that help us also to break down some of the systemic and historical biases and adverse impacts in a way that we could not do if only industry did it or if only government did it. And I think some of the things that we must start to do is to figure out in a very transparent way to understand what the risks really are today, but also projecting what they might be, in the near and long-term future. So I am a big advocate of that. And I think that you will see that happening. You'll see that happening at the federal level. You'll see that happening at the state level, and you'll see it happening at the local level. And all three
to leave our audience with something. And so we'll start with you, Delegate Maldonado. What would you like our audience to remember about the role of AI in state and local government? Are there anything pressing?
Yeah, I don't think it's just limited to government. I think that we must maintain the humanity in the technology. And it's very easy to, when you start to really focus on creativity and efficiency, to strip that element out. So how do you lend compassion, and how do you sort of keep the rights that I mentioned earlier that are durable? The rights piece of the RU framework, from risks, rights, and use cases, it's durable, and we must make sure that we're asking the question, what's possibly not protected here? Not just what is, but what are we missing? Always asking yourself the question, what are we missing? And remember, speaking as a recovering lawyer, in Virginia, if you reference case law from 1812, that's great. It's recent. A lot of other jurisdictions tend to note something more recent. But in Virginia, you can do really centuries old law, and people think it's great. And we're used to passing laws and then walking away as if we're done. This is not going to be the case with technology. We're going to have to get used to having laws and frameworks that are breathable, flexible, and then we come back and we iterate again. As the technology evolves, so too will the regulatory frameworks. So, thank you.
Thank you. And Tracy, any closing thoughts, anything related to the future of AI and Gen AI tools and public-private partnerships?
Yeah, one thing that we haven't talked too much about today, but I think is probably just going to be on people's minds because we're in an election year, is AI being politicized. So if we step back for a bit, AI for the most part has been an outlier in not being overly politicized. But we think that it's essential to preserve this because AI is not specifically a Democratic issue. It's not specifically a Republican issue, especially in this election year. It's an issue for all of us. It's an issue that we should all care about, and it's an issue where we should want the U.S. to continue to lead in this space. I do want to note, however, that there will be downstream impacts of the uses of AI, and those downstream impacts will inevitably touch on things that are highly political, which are jobs, education, and healthcare. And so just keeping that in mind, and as the public and private sectors continue to chat and talk and have meaningful discussions about how we may partner together, I think it's really important for both sides to remain earnest and humble in learning and staying open-minded to what the private sector might not know about the public sector, what the public sector might not know about the science behind the technology, and going in really with an open mind so that we can have productive discussions moving forward.
Thank you. And lastly, Tatiana, any final thoughts on the legislative future of AI or things to think about protecting and balancing privacy and ethical considerations?
Yeah, I think everybody should really be thinking about AI governance programs because whether we like it or not, regulations are coming at the state and local level and potentially even at the federal level, who knows? And so I do think those who are starting to invest in ethical AI governance right now will be ahead of the game. And I think that's a really important thing to be taking away from this conversation. I think a lot of folks are concerned about regulation, of course, and how it's going to cost them now, but it will be setting you up better for the future.
Thank you all, and thank you again, Tracy, Delegate Maldonado, and Tatiana.
Let's give it up. Thank you so much. Caleb, fantastic job.